Hello everyone and welcome to our video lecture for this week. So for this week we are going to be talking about the third step in Kennedy's process, which is action. So we'll talk about what it means to define action, and we'll talk about the connection to the hat. So I never want to lose sight of that. Now over the past couple of weeks, first we talked about assessment, understanding where we are in terms of diversity. Then we talked about acceptance. So sort of what it means to have support for diversity and also what our barriers to diversity are. Now this week we'll talk about action. So we'll talk about what specific steps we can take, what kinds of things we can do to move diversity forward. So first we'll talk about what it means to define action. So what exactly does action mean in our organization? So action simply means moving forward or doing something. So we talk about action in terms of tangible steps, tangible things that we do to advance something, right? To make something happen. We also talk about creating positive momentum. So in terms of diversity, we want to think about what are those positive things that we can do to move diversity forward, to continue that positive momentum. Now think about momentum, right? Momentum is about not just propelling something forward, but continuing to move it forward, right? It's a continuous process. We also think about focus, so having very clear and very focused kinds of goals. And lastly, we talk about our goal orientation. Now I want to talk about goal orientation just a bit more so that we think about the different kinds of goals that we have for ourselves and in organizations. So just a little bit more about goal orientation. So there's two ways to think about how we approach goals. The first one is called a mastery orientation or intrinsic orientation, and the second one is called performance orientation or an extrinsic orientation. So kind of two different ways to think about it. One is sort of this intrinsic, this inward look. The other one, extrinsic, sort of an outward look. So the goal can be, for example, you're trying to master something simply because you want to, right? Simply because you are wanting to do something for yourself, right? It's you want to learn more. You want to be a better person. You want to be a better mom or dad or whatever, right? So you have this sort of intrinsic motivation to do something, this intrinsic orientation, versus this performance orientation, this performative kind of outward-facing goal, right? I'm going to do this because I want more money, or because this will help me advance in my career, or because I simply want a new car. It'll get me to my destination faster or more efficiently, right? There's sort of this external kind of motivation behind this, okay? There's also two different ways to think about the goals that we set as well as the goals for organizations. And you've probably talked about this, learned about this before in other classes or maybe in your workplace, but there's two ways to think about this. The first is proximal and the other is distal. So this is just a fancy way of saying short-term and long-term. So proximal goals would be those that are closest to you, so short-term goals. Distal goals are those that are farthest from you, so long-term goals. So we think about that not only in why we're doing the goal, why we set the goal that we set, so it's the orientation we have, a mastery orientation versus a performance orientation, but also, is that a long-term goal or is it a short-term goal? So we think about those things when we think about not only our own goals, but also goals for organizations. So kind of switching gears again, action requires several things that Kennedy outlines for us. So action requires leadership. And that's, again, she's talked about leadership, building leadership at all levels of the organization, not just at the top, for example. Action also requires trust. You have to be able to trust your colleagues, trust your organization. You have to be able to trust in order to help move something new forward. And connected with trust, action also requires risk-taking. Okay, so being able to take risks, but also being safe to fail, right? It's okay. A culture should be supportive of failure. It should be supportive of not getting it right the first time. That's a hallmark of innovation, is not getting it right the first time, but trying again, nevertheless. Okay. Action also requires planning. So in terms of making sure that we have goals set, that we have a strategic plan, that we're moving forward in the right direction. What else? So there may be lots of other things that can help move something forward that is a requirement of an action, right? To make something happen, particularly something new in an organization. There are maybe lots of things that go into that. So when you're thinking about writing this section, you'll want to think about some specific examples, and we've talked about some specific examples before in this class. So some specific examples that you might think about and that we've talked about before include things like employee resource groups. We talked about those a few weeks ago. Diversity committees. Lots of organizations use diversity committees to plan events, to advance diversity in an organization, to hire and recruit and retain diverse talent. We also have targeted recruiting, so thinking about how do we specifically go for someone who is from an underrepresented class of people. There's also diversity events, and lots of organizations, particularly larger organizations, are even doing like all-day events where you get to hear from the different employee resource groups, you get to hear about the different resources that are available in terms of diversity, things like that. Some organizations also do cultural fairs. They have a way for different cultures in the organization to sort of showcase themselves, right? Showcase what their culture means and things like that. And then lastly, leadership communication. Diversity often fails, or diversity efforts, initiatives often fail because there's not support from the leadership of the organization. So leadership communication can be an important variable in the sort of the equation of moving diversity forward in an organization. So let's talk about the connection to the hat for this portion of your paper. So this is from the syllabus. Building upon the information you have provided in the first two sections, detail 3 specific goals related to diversity that your organization should consider undertaking. In detailing these goals, make sure to include the who, what, when, why, where, and how to have a complete description. Ask yourself, how would you get people involved in these initiatives? Also ask what resources would be needed to put these goals into action. So what I'm looking for here, again, these 3 specific goals. For those of you who have organizations who are very sophisticated in diversity, there's always something new to be done, right? So think about it from that perspective. What is the next step for the organization? What is something they could do better? And have that specific goal in mind. For organizations that might be small or medium-sized that don't have a lot of diversity efforts happening right now, you have it wide open, right? But be realistic. Make sure that the goals that you set fit the organization that you've chosen, okay? And lastly, I want to just mention, I'm going to look for 3 specific goals, right? I'm going to look for three very specific, very concrete kinds of things that you would recommend for your organization. So in this paper, I would just detail exactly what those are. Goal number 1 is blah, blah, blah. And this is who has to make it happen. This is what it is. This is when it's going to happen. Remember proximal versus distal. Why are we doing this? Who's going to be involved? What are the resources, et cetera, et cetera. Goal number 2, same thing. Goal number 3, same thing. So I want to see specifically 3 goals. Now you can put more if you want, but I'm going to look for at least 3 goals in your hat paper. Okay, as always, contact me if you have questions, and good luck with this portion.